Okay, welcome to I11 Introduction to Risk Management. So if you've been on one of these sessions before, you will know the drill. We cover the whole module in an hour. We do move quite quickly through the book, basically pulling out all of the key things that you need to know for your exam. My name's Emma. I'm a learning specialist for Empower Development, and we do insurance training across the market. You can follow us on Instagram. My handle's just there at Empower Development, and also you can follow me at Empower Emma. A bit of a tongue twister. But let's get stuck in to risk management. So you'll know from your previous studies that the term risk is used in many different ways across the insurance industry and in everyday life. So risk is addressed through the activity of risk management, which helps to protect individuals, businesses, and governments from harm. As individuals, things like age, personality, gender, wealth, experience of life and culture can influence what our attitude is towards risk. Businesses can identify their risk as well in their annual reports and in their accounts. So there's a number of factors that influence our attitude to risk. And you may remember from your previous studies that individuals can be risk-seeking or risk-averse. So risk seekers might be people who throw themselves off cliffs, bungee jumping, and then risk-averse people might prefer to stay at home with a hot chocolate. So risk as an insurance term can be used in a number of different ways. We sort of explored that in the earlier modules as well. So we can use it to describe the type of policy that's on cover, the name for the physical object being insured, and then also to refer to the chance of an insured loss occurring. And insurance is one of the main tools for personal and corporate risk management. So there's often a distinction between the term risk, which is where the statistical probability of an event can be calculated, and uncertainty, which is where there are too many variables involved to make the calculation accurately. So in day-to-day life, we tend to use these terms interchangeably. So there are different levels of risk, namely frequency, how often something will happen, and severity, which is how serious it will be if it does happen. And this concept of frequency and severity you're probably very familiar with from your previous CII studies. You may also remember the terms peril and hazard. So a peril is that gives rise to a loss, like a fire. And then the hazard is the thing that influences the operation or the effect of a peril. So like a thatched roof on a house is going to influence that peril of fire because it's really flammable. So remember that hazards can be physical, so they relate to the physical characteristics of a risk, and also moral, which is about the attitude and behaviour of people. So people and companies can respond to risk in different ways, according to what we call their risk appetite. So one might be risk seeking, like we mentioned, so likes to take risks, or one might be risk averse, so they prefer to stay well away from risks, as far away as possible. And in risk management, we've got something called a risk tolerance. And this is a useful tool in managing risk in organisations. Risk tolerance is like the level of risk above and beyond what they're able to accept. So a company is going to decide what its risk appetite is. You might find that you can find out what the risk appetite is of the company that you work for. You know, what type of risk do you like as a company? What do you like to stay away from? So risk appetite is really all about the desire and the ability to pursue risk in the business. The business will outline its risk appetite in a document which outlines which risks they're willing to take and how that aligns to their strategy, their financial soundness, and the capital resources that they have as well. So looking now at risk culture. So risk culture is described as the appetite, attitude, and understanding of risks that's shared by a group of people. Risk culture is displayed in a mixture of formal and informal processes and behaviours. So if we think about a poor risk culture, indicators of that would be sort of situations where the leadership of a company are sending inconsistent or unclear messages. The company might have had an audit and it reveals that risk management procedures are ignored, amongst a variety of other things. Where a company's got a good risk culture, we see things like good management, all the staff are trained really well, they're all learning from their mistakes, they'll take advice, and they're willing to spend money on improving their risks as well. So a business really is aiming to be what we call risk mature, which means they want to create a supportive culture that accepts and recognises uncertainty and welcomes opportunities through effective risk management. So moving on to chapter 2 now. We are now more risk averse than we have been in the past. We live in a risk society. There's new types of risks everywhere, and they're no longer confined to sort of one country or one region. Real-time communications like TV and social media, that provides uncertainty, that can increase people's anxieties as well. We've had also disasters that can be man-made or natural. We've always been exposed to those, but there is sort of an increased emphasis now on preparing for them and reducing their impact. So things like wildfires, earthquakes, and pandemics now as well. In respect to those man-made factors that influence natural catastrophes, we're really looking at things like global warming, greenhouse gases, climate change, to sort of name a few. With this in mind, another form of man-made disasters is when corporate businesses suffer from poor or corrupt leadership, which then leads to them failing. This can affect local economies, can affect the lives of the employees and also the stakeholders of the business as well. Man-made disasters, they can also cause a risk in a society. So if we look at like airplane crashes, ferry accidents, fires and explosions, for example. And finally, we also have something now called globalization, which means that international trade, financial markets and communications are all linked together. So what this means is that if a disaster strikes somewhere in that global chain, it can have major impacts elsewhere across the world. So the risks that global society must prepare for is, first of all, we've got their economic risks. So economic risks relate to things like the price of energy. We're experiencing that at the moment. Also the financial crisis that we saw in 2007, 2008. It's important that things like this are invested in. Environmental risks. So this is things like we've just mentioned about extreme weather events, that failure to adapt to climate change, and man-made catastrophes like oil spills, for example. Then we've got political risks. So this is includes terrorism, internal violence, which affects like a national government, or sudden and violent events, such as use of weapons of mass destruction from actions in other countries. Societal risks includes like water and food crises, and rapid and massive spread of infections and disease, just like we saw with COVID. And then finally, we've got technological risks, and that relates to the introduction of autonomous vehicles, certainly cars that drive by themselves, and they're a big risk. Cyber attacks, misuse of technology, and there's a number of new technologies that cause concern. A few of those, like 3D printing. What can we do with that? What happens if that gets into the wrong hands? Robotics, geoengineering, and crime associated with the misuse of social media as well.